May the Lord's peace embrace you, His light strengthen your steps, and His love never leave your heart. Welcome to God's hidden plan, where each story from the Bible is more than history, it is a living message for you today. The unbecoming. The war began not with a sound, but with a silence. Before time was a river, when eternity was an ocean, a stillness fell in a place where only harmony had ever reigned. It was a silence born of a single, unutterable thought, a thought that coiled in the heart of the most brilliant of all created beings. In that moment, the fabric of heaven, woven from light and praise, pulled taut. A single thread, golden and luminous, had chosen to twist against the weave, and from that infinitesimal strain, a schism would tear through the cosmos, its echoes shaping all that was, and all that was yet to be. The memory of it would later be told as a clash of lightning and shadow, a cosmic battlefield where stars were scattered like dust. A confrontation between two titans, Michael, the Archangel, a pillar of incandescent loyalty, his form a testament to divine light, and Satan, the adversary, a being cloaked in the magnificent darkness of his own pride, his power a raging storm against creation. This was the story whispered in prophecies, etched onto ancient scrolls, and glimpsed in fiery visions, a war so fundamental that it would become the bedrock of the eternal struggle between good and evil. But to understand the cataclysm, one must first understand the perfection it shattered. One must return to the dawn, to a realm of unimaginable beauty, a celestial kingdom bathed in the unfiltered glory of its creator. Heaven was a symphony of existence. Countless angels, beings of pure light and purpose, stood in perpetual awe before a throne that blazed with a fire that did not consume, but created. Their existence was song, their movement was worship, their purpose was service. They were the messengers, the guardians, the artists of the divine will, each a perfect note in an infinite composition. Among this celestial host, two figures stood in prominence. The first was Michael. His name was a declaration, a question that was its own answer. Who is like God? He was the commander of the heavenly armies, his spirit forged from unwavering fidelity, his countenance resolute and clear. He was a warrior, but his strength was not his own. It was a channeled reflection of the divine authority he served without question. He was the embodiment of righteous power, a living symbol of loyalty. And then there was Lucifer, the morning star, the light bringer. He had been created as the pinnacle of angelic artistry, a being of such dazzling beauty and unmatched wisdom that his very presence seemed to amplify the glory of the throne he was meant to reflect. His wings caught the light of God and fractured it into 1,000 new splendors. His voice, when it joined the celestial choir, was a counter-melody so exquisite it made the very stars weep. He was beloved, admired, a masterpiece of the divine hand. He was perfect, and in that perfection, a seed was planted. Was there praise for the throne, or for the light that emanated from it, a light he so perfectly mirrored? While other angels reflected God's glory in blissful service, Lucifer began to contemplate the glory itself. He looked at the adoration of the angelic hosts, and a subtle dissonance entered his thoughts. Was there praise for the throne, or for the light that emanated from it, a light he so perfectly mirrored? He saw the order of heaven, the perfect harmony of beings serving the Creator's plan, and for the first time, he did not feel peace, but constraint. It was not a flaw in his design, but a consequence of the great gift he shared with all of God's sentient creations. Choice. It was the glint of ambition. It was the glint of ambition. This was the moment of exquisite and terrible peace, when heaven's eternal harmony teetered on the precipice of chaos. A single thought, born of pride in the heart of the most magnificent of angels, was about to ignite a war that would not be fought for territory or crowns, but for the very nature of existence and the soul of a creation yet to be born. The stage was set, not on a battlefield of dirt and stone, but in the heart of perfection itself, the seduction of a third heaven. The change in Lucifer was as subtle as the cooling of a star over 1,000,000 millennia, yet to those with the senses to perceive it, it was a terrifying shift in the celestial climate. A faint discord began to weave its way into the heavenly symphony, a note of questioning where before there had been only affirmation. Lucifer began to move apart from the great congregations of worship. He would stand on the crystalline shores of the sea of glass, not in contemplation of the divine majesty it reflected, but seemingly in contemplation of his own reflection within it. His words, once a source of light and wisdom, became veiled and intricate. He would engage other angels in discourse, not to celebrate the Creator's plan, but to dissect it. Is it not a marvel? He would begin, his voice a mesmerizing cascade of silver tones. that we are given such immense capacity, such intellect, such power. We are beings of fire and light. Does it not seem a limited purpose to merely stand and sing? He prayed on their identities. To the warrior angels, he spoke of valor. You are the might of heaven, yet your swords remain sheathed. Is true strength not meant to be tested, to be proven? To the seraphim, whose existence was to burn with love for the Creator, he whispered of a deeper love. To love something is to know it completely. Yet are there not mysteries, decrees we are simply told to accept? Is true love not found in understanding, in equality, rather than blind obedience? A seed of pride, once a solitary growth in his own heart, now became a pollen he scattered on the celestial winds. He did not preach open rebellion, not at first. He planted whispers, cultivated doubts, and nurtured the fledgling ambitions of others. He made them feel that their own light was being dimmed by the singular, overwhelming brilliance of the throne. He was seductive, his logic a beautiful, intricate trap. He painted a picture of a grander destiny, a self-determined existence where their own glory could shine unshadowed. One by one, they listened. An angel of great strategic mind, who felt his plans were always subsumed by a greater, unknowable will. A guardian of a distant star system, who began to see his domain not as a charge to be kept, but as a kingdom to be ruled. An artist angel, who wove constellations into being, began to resent that his creations were merely part of a larger canvas and not masterpieces in their own right. Lucifer convinced them that their service was servitude, that their loyalty was a cage. He offered them freedom, but it was a freedom defined by self-aggrandizement. He forged a coalition not of traitors, but of believers in a new, self-centered truth. They were not falling from grace. They were, in their own minds, reaching for a higher one. A third of the stars of heaven began to orbit a new Sunday. Michael watched this unfolding tragedy with a growing, cold dread. He felt the shift in the celestial harmony not as a flaw, but as a wound. He approached Lucifer, not as an accuser, but as a brother. "Lucifer," he said, his voice direct and unadorned, a stark contrast to the Lightbringer's serpentine rhetoric. "A shadow follows you. You speak of freedom, but you forge chains of pride. You speak of light, but you lead others into a gathering darkness. This path leads away from the throne. There is no destination on that road but emptiness." Lucifer turned, his beauty now possessing a sharp, dangerous edge. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a fire that did not illuminate, but consumed. "You see a shadow, Michael, because you are afraid of the light I wish to cast. You speak of chains, but you have never felt the weight of them, because you have never dared to test their strength. You are content to be a reflection. I was made to be a source. There is a higher throne than the one we serve, and I shall ascend to it. I will raise my own throne above the stars of God." The declaration hung in the air, a blasphemy so profound it cracked the very firmament. It was no longer a whisper of pride. It was an open declaration of war. The choice was made. The lines were drawn. Michael's hand went to the hilt of the sword at his side, a blade forged not of metal, but of pure, concentrated divine will. He did not draw it in anger, but with a deep, sorrowful resolve. The time for words was over. The Almighty could have extinguished this rebellion with a single thought, a breath of divine power that would unmake the rebels as easily as they were made. But creation was built upon the sanctity of choice. To nullify their decision would be to nullify the very principle of their being. A confrontation was permitted. The challenge would be met, not by an overwhelming display of omnipotence, but by the loyalty of those who chose to stand for the truth. Michael, champion of heaven, turned to the legion of angels who remained steadfast, their light pure and unwavering. His voice rang through the celestial courts, a clarion call of loyalty. "For the glory of the one who made us, for the truth of his reign." Across the celestial plain, Lucifer, now beginning to shed his name like a chrysalis, his form subtly darkening with the intensity of his ambition, rallied his own host. Their light was now feverish, a brilliant but unstable glow. He raised his own weapon, a spear of blackest obsidian that seemed to drink the very light from the air around it. The rebellion was no longer a matter of philosophy. It was inevitable. The heart of heaven was about to become a battlefield, the clashing of light. The war erupted with a silent, blinding flash that tore across the celestial expanse. It was not a war of sound as mortals know it, but a cataclysm of being against being, will against will. The anthems of praise were replaced by the shriek of spiritual energies colliding. The serene hum of heaven was shattered by the impact of divine purpose against defiant pride. Michael's legions moved as one, a river of pure, golden light, their wings beating in a single, unified rhythm that was a war drum of loyalty. They were an army of unwavering conviction. Each warrior knew his cause was not his own, but the defense of the very foundation of their existence. Their swords, drawn now, were extensions of their faith, glowing with an inner fire that could not be quenched. They were not fighting for victory, but for order itself. Against them came a fractured, chaotic storm. Satan's host was a maelstrom of individual glories, a legion of ambitions. Their light was dazzling but discordant sharp violets, feverish crimsons, and cold, arrogant blues. Each rebel angel fought for his own ascension, his own imagined throne. They were a force of immense power, a third of the heavenly host, but they were not unified. They were a collection of furiously burning stars that had pulled free from their galaxy, each believing it could become its own universe. Their leader, Satan, was a vortex of darkness at their center, his beauty now twisted into a terrible majesty. His pride was a gravity well, pulling them all into his singular, destructive purpose. The clash was immediate and absolute. Michael, radiant and unyielding, met Satan in the heart of the storm. It was a collision that sent shockwaves trembling through the very firmament of heaven. Michael's sword of divine will met Satan's spear of self-aggrandizement. Golden light warred against a devouring shadow. When they struck, it was not steel that rang, but concepts. Truth struck against deceit. Service struck against domination. Loyalty struck against rebellion. Around them, the celestial battlefield was a breathtaking and horrific tapestry. Angels wielded weapons of pure energy, shields of faith that deflected blows of doubt. A phalanx of loyalists would form a wall of incandescent white, holding back a charge of angels whose forms flickered with the unstable energy of their rebellion. An archangel from Michael's command, his face a mask of sorrowful duty, would parry the blow of a friend he had sung with for eons, now twisted by the poison of ambition. There were no cries of pain, but there were surges of despair, flares of rage, and the terrible, silent implosion of a celestial spirit giving way. Satan fought with the desperation of one who had already damned himself and had nothing left to lose. He was a whirlwind of dazzling feints and devastating strikes, his wisdom now a weapon of cunning, and his power an untethered force of destruction. He sought to break Michael's resolve, to find a crack in his faith. "Look at this, Michael." His thoughts pierced through the chaos, a voice of venomous silk. "This is freedom. This is true existence, not the endless, mindless repetition of praise. Join me. We can reshape this stagnant perfection into something truly glorious, a universe of our own making." Michael did not answer with words. His response was the steady, unwavering light of his being. His eyes, fixed on the adversary, held no hatred, only a profound and terrible pity. He was not fighting a rival. He was purging a sickness. His movements were precise, economical, and absolute. He was a conduit for a power far beyond his own, a power that was inherent to the very structure of reality. Satan was fighting against an army. Michael was fighting with the full weight of creation at his back. The turning point was not a single blow, but a dawning realization that swept through the rebel host. They were fighting against the very source of their own light. Their power, born of God, was being used to defy him, and it was a finite resource. Their brilliant, feverish light began to flicker, their strength waning not from exhaustion, but from the spiritual schism they had created within themselves. They were branches fighting against the tree that gave them life. As his legions faltered, Satan's rage and pride reached a crescendo. He gathered all his remaining power, all his magnificent light, and all his profound darkness into one final, cataclysmic strike aimed at the very heart of Michael's being. It was a blow intended to shatter not just the Archangel, but the very concept of loyalty he represented. Michael met the blow not with equal force, but with absolute stillness. He held his ground, a beacon of pure, unadulterated truth. He did not need to overpower Satan, he only needed to endure. The adversary's attack, a monument to the self, crashed against the immovable object of divine order. In that moment, the war was over. The rebellion, for all its sound and fury, shattered. A great, thunderous roar, not of triumph, but of finality, echoed through heaven. The war wasn't won, it was concluded. The lie had exhausted itself against the truth. The great expulsion, the aftermath of the battle, was a silence more profound than any song. The clashing energies ceased. The feverish, chaotic lights of the rebellious host extinguished, not into nothingness, but into a deep and starless shadow. A vast emptiness scarred the celestial plane where a third of heaven's angels had once stood. The remaining legions, led by Michael, stood victorious, but their radiance was muted by a solemn, sorrowful air. Their swords of light still glowed, but they were no longer held at the ready. They were lowered in a posture of grim finality. Satan and his followers were defeated. They were not annihilated, not unmade, but fundamentally changed. Their inner light, having been severed from its source and turned against it, had collapsed inward, creating a void. The beauty of the morning star was gone, consumed by the black hole of his own pride. His form, once a marvel of divine artistry, was now a twisted mockery of it, shrouded in a palpable aura of malice and despair. He stood defeated, yet his eyes burned with a defiance that was absolute. There was no remorse. There was no surrender. There was only the hardening of his will into an eternal, unchangeable enmity. Then came the judgment. It was not delivered by Michael, for he was a champion, not a judge. It came from the throne itself, a pronouncement that was not a spoken word but an irresistible, cosmic decree. The very fabric of heaven recoiled from the rebels. The verse would later be written: "The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels with him." The expulsion was a terrifying spectacle. It was not a gentle escort to the gates, but a violent, gravitational casting out. Satan and his angels were ripped from the celestial realm, plummeting like a shower of blackened meteors through the planes of existence. They fell from a state of pure grace into a realm of materiality, their fall a shriek of spiritual agony that tore through the cosmos. Heaven, the realm of divine presence, purged itself of the rebellion. The space they had occupied was now a clean, aching void. There was no longer any place for them in heaven. As they fell, their forms solidified, their ethereal nature bound by the laws of a lower dimension. They were cast out from the presence of God, their punishment an eternal exile from the glory they had once known and then despised. Michael watched them fall, his face a canvas of sorrow. He had not fought to destroy his brethren, but to save heaven. The victory was decisive, but it tasted of ash. The harmony of heaven was restored, the discordant notes silenced, but the symphony would forever be missing a third of its voices. A somber tone now lay beneath the eternal song of praise, a memory of the cost of pride. God, the ultimate authority, had pronounced the judgment. Satan's rebellion had posed a divine question: why did you rebel? And in his unrepentant silence, Satan had given his answer. His punishment was not annihilation, which might have been seen as a tyrant silencing dissent. In a surprising, almost baffling act of restraint, God did not destroy him. Instead, his new domain was to be the earth, the nascent world of matter and burgeoning life. He was banished, his power severely limited, but his influence was permitted. His role was now defined by his nature: the adversary, the tempter, the accuser. He would be allowed to roam this new world, to sow discord, to test the new creation that was to come. Michael knelt before the blazing throne, laying his sword of light at its base. His duty was done. Heaven was secure, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled his very essence, that the war was not over. It had simply moved to a new battlefield. Far below, on the surface of a young, fragile planet, his great adversary was stirring. Satan, no longer the morning star but the prince of darkness, prowled the earth, his eyes burning with a cold, patient malice. The first great battle had ended, but the campaign for the soul of humanity was just about to begin. Michael remained heaven's guardian, his sword ready, knowing he would be called to fight again. The lingering question. In the eons that followed, a quietude returned to the celestial courts, but it was a changed quietude. It was the silence of a house where a great tragedy has occurred, a space haunted by the ghost of what was lost. The war had been swift and decisive, a surgical removal of a cancer from the heart of heaven. Yet, a profound and unsettling mystery remained, a question that echoed in the silent contemplation of angels and would later haunt the minds of prophets and theologians for millennia. Why? Why was the rebellion allowed to fester in the first place? Why did the omniscient one, who sees the end from the beginning, permit the most brilliant of his creations to walk a path that could only lead to ruin? And perhaps most baffling of all, why, after the decisive victory, was the adversary not unmade? Why was this font of cosmic evil, this proven deceiver, cast down to the very world that was destined to be the cradle of God's most beloved creation, humanity? Why give the wolf the keys to the sheepfold? The story of the war, as it would be preserved in the sacred texts of mankind, was remarkably brief. The book of Revelation would capture the climax in a few stark, powerful lines, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. The account was a declaration of victory, not a detailed chronicle of battle. It stated the what, but left the why shrouded in divine mystery. This brevity, this lack of detail, fueled endless speculation. Was the war a literal physical conflict in a spiritual dimension, with legions clashing and weapons of light? Or was it a symbolic allegory, a grand celestial drama representing the eternal, internal struggle between order and chaos, obedience and pride, that exists within every sentient heart? The lack of a clear, doctrinal explanation on the mechanics of the war or the full motives of Satan left a space for human thought to wrestle with the nature of God himself. On the new earth, Satan began his work. He was no longer a being of light, but of shadow and subtlety. He prowled the virgin world, a place of immense potential and fragile innocence. He saw the raw materials of creation, the fertile ground, the beasts of the field, and he saw his chance. His banishment was not just a punishment, it was an opportunity. If he could not conquer heaven, he would corrupt earth. If he could not usurp God's throne, he would deface his prized creation. His strategy shifted from open rebellion to insidious deception. This was the core of the anomaly. The war in heaven established God's absolute sovereignty and the futility of rebellion. Yet, the outcome, Satan's exile to earth, seemed to set up a new, more complex conflict. It introduced an element of profound risk into the divine plan. It was a testament to the awesome and terrifying reality of free will. Angels, it turned out, were not automatons of praise. They were created with the capacity to choose, and the consequences of that choice were real and eternal. Their choice to rebel, and God's choice to allow that rebellion to play out, revealed a foundational truth about the universe: that love cannot be coerced, and loyalty cannot be programmed. It must be freely given, even when the alternative is catastrophic. And so, the great conflict was not truly about Michael versus Satan. It was about a much deeper principle. The war was a demonstration. It proved that rebellion against the source of all being is ultimately self-defeating. Satan's fall was not merely a punishment inflicted from without. It was the inevitable internal collapse of a being who chose self over truth. God did not need to destroy him. By his own choice, Satan had already destroyed himself, trading his name, Lightbringer, for adversary. His exile was not just a sentence, it was a reflection of his new nature. He had chosen darkness, and so he was cast into a place where shadows could grow long and deep. The stage was now perfectly set for the next act of the divine drama, a story in which humanity would be the central player, caught between a fallen star and the enduring light of its creator. Echoes in the canon, centuries turned into millennia on the terrestrial sphere below, and the memory of the celestial war became a story told in shadows and whispers. While the canonical scriptures of humanity focus primarily on God's covenant with man, the echoes of that first, great conflict reverberated through the texts, offering tantalizing glimpses into the cosmic backstory of evil. Theologians and scholars would piece together these fragments, attempting to build a coherent picture from the divine puzzle. One school of thought, gazing at the world's ancient myths, saw the story as symbolic. They pointed to the Babylonian Enuma Elish, where the storm god Marduk battles the chaos dragon Tiamat, or to Canaanite legends of Baal confronting the sea monster Lotan. They argued that the book of Revelation was using the familiar, potent imagery of a divine warrior vanquishing a chaos monster to communicate a profound spiritual truth: God's ultimate and inevitable victory over the forces of disorder and evil. In this view, Michael was the archetype of divine order, and Satan, the dragon, was the personification of cosmic rebellion. The war was not a historical event with angelic armies, but a powerful metaphor for a timeless struggle. Yet, a more literal interpretation held powerful sway, insisting that the spiritual realm was just as real as the physical one, and that a conflict of this magnitude was not only possible but necessary to explain the origin of evil. This theory gained depth when connected to other, more obscure passages in the Bible. The prophet Isaiah, in a taunt against the king of Babylon, wrote words that were seen for ages as a description of Lucifer's fall. "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning! How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations! For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High, Though directed at a human king, the imagery was too celestial, the pride too cosmic, to be contained by a mortal vessel. It was seen as a dual prophecy, describing both a temporal king and his spiritual master. Similarly, the Book of Job presented a strange scene, Satan appearing before God in the heavenly court, alongside the other sons of God, angels. He was not a prisoner, but an accuser, free to roam the earth and challenge the faithfulness of God's servants. This supported the narrative of an expelled but not annihilated adversary, one whose role was now to test and to tempt, operating within limits set by the very divine authority he had defied. But it was the apocryphal texts, the books that were not included in the final canon of the Bible, that truly ignited the imagination. The Book of Enoch, a text of immense influence in the centuries before Christ, painted the war in vivid, sprawling detail. It gave names to the forgotten characters, the lieutenants in Satan's host. It spoke of Azazel, a leader of the fallen who taught humanity forbidden arts, weaponry, and ornamentation, and was ultimately bound in the desert for his corruption. It described legions of angels who, led by pride and lust, abandoned their posts and set off the chain of events that led to the Great Rebellion. These texts, like the Book of Jubilees, while not considered inspired scripture by most, filled in the narrative gaps. They provided the roster of combatants that Revelation omitted. They explained why the Bible was so silent on the details. The focus of the canonical texts was always on God's redemption plan for humanity, not on providing a complete history of angelic politics. The war was a critical backstory, but it was not the main story. The main story was what happened after the fall, on the new battlefield of Earth. Michael, from his celestial vantage point, was a silent witness to these human attempts to understand. He saw them grapple with the same questions that had once brought such sorrow to heaven. He recalled the faces of angels he had once called brother, angels like Azazel, whose name meant scapegoat, a title that hinted at a deeper, more complex spiritual battle. He remembered their light before it had soured into ambition. These were not symbolic archetypes to him. They were fallen comrades, a testament to the tragic power of a single, prideful choice. The human texts, in their searching, their theories, and their myths, were all touching upon a piece of the truth, that a real war had been fought, a real choice had been made, and its consequences were now woven into the very fabric of human history. God's victory was absolute, but the mystery of Satan's continued influence was the crucible in which humanity's own loyalty would now be forged. The great design, to zoom out from the battle, from the fall, from the eons of human struggle, is to see the war not as an isolated catastrophe, but as a necessary and terrifying movement in a divine symphony of unimaginable scope. The war between Michael and Satan was never merely about a power struggle in heaven. It was about the fundamental nature of created existence, free will. The question of why God would allow such a war is inextricably linked to the question of why he created beings with the capacity to choose at all. A heaven of automatons, programmed for perpetual praise, would be a realm of perfect order, but it would be a realm without love, for love requires the freedom to not love. Loyalty is meaningless without the possibility of betrayal. Goodness is not a virtue if evil is not an option. Satan's rebellion was the ultimate test case for this principle, played out on the highest possible stage. By allowing Lucifer to choose pride, and by allowing a third of the angels to follow him, God demonstrated the profound respect he holds for the autonomy of his creation. The war that followed was not an act of divine anger, but of divine justice. It was a demonstration that rebellion against the source of life is, by its very nature, a path to self-destruction. The fall from heaven was not an arbitrary punishment. It was the logical consequence of severing oneself from the divine presence. It was a spiritual law, as immutable as gravity. This celestial object lesson set the stage for humanity. Adam's sin in the Garden of Eden was a microcosm of Lucifer's rebellion. The serpent's temptation, "You will be like God," was a direct echo of Satan's own prideful declaration, "I will be like the Most High." The Tower of Babel, a human attempt to build a tower to the heavens and make a name for themselves, mirrored the same ambition that fractured the celestial realm. The war in heaven taught a universal truth: rebellion, born of pride, always leads to exile and confusion. Over time, as God's plan for humanity unfolded, the theological understanding of the war deepened. Michael's victory was seen as a foreshadowing, a type of the ultimate victory that was to come. Michael, the Archangel champion, fought to secure heaven's borders, but a greater champion was needed to reclaim the new battlefield of Earth. The narrative of Scripture began to shift its focus from the angelic war to the coming of Christ. His life, death, and resurrection were seen as the definitive and final triumph over the adversary. While Michael had cast Satan out of heaven, Christ would conquer the power of sin and death that Satan had introduced to earth. The heavenly war thus serves as the grand prologue to the story of redemption. It establishes the enemy, explains the origin of evil, and demonstrates the stakes of the conflict. It reveals God's character, his justice in the face of rebellion, and his incredible mercy and foresight in his response. He did not annihilate his fallen creation, but allowed him to continue, his power limited, so that through the struggle against evil, God's own glory, his grace, and his ultimate plan for salvation could be revealed in the most profound way possible. The war was not a divine mistake. It was the dark, velvet backdrop against which the diamond of redemption could be displayed in all its brilliant, multifaceted glory. It teaches us that while free will makes a fall possible, it is also what makes salvation meaningful.